What do a NASA scientist, a billionaire, fighter pilots, and a group of school children in Africa all have in common? They've all seen something that they can't explain. These aren't random stories. These are direct accounts told on the Joe Rogan Experience by the very people who saw them. From Bob Lazar to Zimbabwe's school UFO, this might be the most compelling cases yet that something is going on. And if it's true, it changes everything. If you're into UFOs, government secrets, and real eyewitness stories, this is the channel for you. We're on a mission to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year because I'm super vain and I want that subscriber plaque, and you can help us get there. Tap that subscribe button and join us on the other side. The first moment we're looking at is when Joe Rogan interviewed the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Chris Mellon. He gives his take on probably the most controversial figure in UFO lore, Bob Lazar. If you've ever wondered whether somebody high up in the Pentagon takes Bob Lazar seriously, buckle up, because Mellon walks a tightrope between disbelief and maybe.
Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
This is one of those rare clips where a government meets the fringe. We get a peek into how those behind classified doors process the wild claims of Area 51 reverse engineering alien tech, so let's roll with it.
I thought it was curious and interesting. I've been to Area 51. I didn't see any flying saucers or anything like that.
What did you see?
I saw Defense Department experiments being performed and training activities and that sort of thing. Nothing that the taxpayer would object to. But,
of course not.
But it's a big range. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, and there's
Right.
a lot of adjacent ranges. If you look at the
Area
map,
S4,
actually,
where he was.
that's what he said.
Yeah. What's your
I
take on
found
him,
his
then?
explanations curious.
How so?
The complexity of it, and the fact that he talked about Laurentium, for example, and then decades later, it turns out that apparently there is a more stable form of that than...
That's element 115?
Sounds right. I couldn't tell you.
But it's called Laurentium.
Laurentium.
That sounds like something from Battlestar Galactica. We need the
all this
Laurentium
stuff
to power
takes
the
you
ship.
into that,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I'm a little skeptical about his claims, I have to say.
In my opinion, you can hear in his tone that the Mellon's not buying Bob's story wholesale, but he's definitely not laughing it off either. That's what makes it interesting. He's trained to keep secrets, but he's also curious in the story. I love how he throws in that Battlestar Galactica line. You can tell he wants to dismiss it, but even he's kind of surprised that Lazar mentioned element 115 before it was officially discovered.
A friend of mine claims to know the gal who was his supervisor when he worked out there and knows what he was actually doing and where he was located, and claims that he was a guy who checked radiation on badges.
That's it. And so all the rest is fiction.
According to that story.
And this is a person that maybe that person's full of shit.
Maybe.
How about that?
I don't have the ground truth on this.
When Mellon says Lazar might have been checking radiation, it sounds like classic discrediting. But that's just a cover story. Or is it the truth? The deeper you go with this stuff, the blurrier it gets.
It's interesting.
He did falsify his educational records, and he's been involved in some other things, and it just doesn't.
You talking about the MIT records? Yeah, he explained that to me. He said that he was working on something for the government, and they sent him to MIT to learn something. I can't say too much. I'll tell you off air because he told me not to talk about it. But it makes more sense when you hear his description of it, that essentially it wasn't documented that he was studying there, because what he was doing was really a terrible thing, a terrible experiment they were working on. When I explain it to you, maybe it'll make more sense. Maybe not, though. Maybe he's full of shit. Maybe he lied about that. What's interesting, though, is he's told the same exact story since the late 80s. And he doesn't seem full of shit. Now, some people are really good at lying. And I've been tricked before, and I'm sure you have, too. There's some people that are just sociopaths. They're really good at...
They don't even know they're lying. They're convinced in their own head while they're spinning it.
He's obviously very intelligent, and he obviously knows a lot about science. He knows a lot about propulsion systems, and he really did work at Los Alamos, which is interesting because he's actually on the employee roster, and they tried to say that he didn't. He knew people that were there. He knew the layout of the building. When he went there with George Knapp, they went through the building. He knew exactly where everything was, and he knew the people that worked there. So he really did work there, apparently, allegedly. His story, what's interesting to me is that, again, it's the same story over and over and over again. And then what's also interesting to me is that he knew and took friends to a place where they were testing these things out. And he knew where it was, and he knew when they were doing it, and he brought his friends out there, and that's when they got arrested.
It's I think there's some consistency there. That is hard to explain. How would he know where to go and what was going on? There are some possible answers to that. I've poked into this a bit. Supposedly, there was a bar off base where the scientists and a lot of the aviators and people would go and hang out. He was frequented that place and picked up information. So I hear stories on both sides of this. I don't know what the ground truth is, and I remain skeptical, but hey, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on.
Notice how he gives the classic Glomar response? That's the kind of thing that makes people believe him even more.
I enjoyed his company. I went to dinner with him and Jeremy, and I talked to him for several hours on the podcast and off the podcast. I don't know, but it's a weird one because he never made any money doing that. He never made any money telling that story.
I'll tell you another story offline. We can exchange stories offline.
I'm excited.
For a guy who used to handle defense intelligence, Mellon seems a little too interested in Bob's story to brush it off completely, which honestly raises more questions than it answers. Up next, we're diving into one of the most compelling UFO encounters ever recorded, straight from the pilot who chased it down. This is a clip from Joe Rogan's podcast with Commander David Fravor, the Navy pilot behind the now legendary 2004 Tic Tac UFO incident. Fravor isn't a whistleblower, he's not a theorist, he's a Top Gun pilot with decades of flight experience who came face to face with something that quite literally defied physics. When he talks, even skeptics get quiet. This isn't grainy footage or an anonymous source, this is a decorated US military aviator telling a story that literally rewrote how the Pentagon talks about UFOs. Let's get into it.
It's way more fascinating when someone like you talks about it versus some fucking random kook. That's what makes me incredibly interested, is just your credibility and the fact that this is not the history of seeing wacky shit that other people don't see.
No, just this once.
But it's on video, and that there's other ones as well. It's really strange. And I've seen people try to explain it away. That video that you show where that thing slips off to the left and takes off at incredible rates of speed, that alone should freak people the fuck out.
I think because people confuse all the time. He took the video. No, it was another crew that took the video. We watched it for 5 minutes with our eyeballs, and there was 4 of us, and we all have the same story. We all saw the same stuff. We all came back and looked at each other and scratched our head and said, WTF, you serious? What was that? And what do? You move on. We never saw it again. I imagine they probably saw him on radar after that, but...
They're probably seeing him on radar all the time. They just don't bring it to the attention of the general public.
Well, because if you don't... For a ship, when they see something and you go, what is that? Well,
Right.
You don't have any way to go out there and look at it.
Fravor's calm tone makes this even creepier. He's not trying to convince anybody. He's just describing what he saw, and that makes it 10 times more believable to me.
When you're talking about how they were informing you that they were seeing these things previous to your mission, when you're doing this exercise and they let you know that they're seeing these things, did you say, hey, how frequent is this? Is this something that happens all the time?
I didn't get into that. Ours was more of the moment of when he's telling us, hey, for the last 2 weeks we've been tracking these things.
Right.
And we don't know what they are.
But you don't know whether or not it was just those 2 weeks, or maybe it was a year ago. There was other similar situations, or...
There's other situations that have happened out there, but I would say for this, I don't even know. One, you got to take it serious. We have a tendency, if we don't know what it is, if we just ignore it, it'll go away. He said, but now we go out and we have these things that are coming at will, and there's nothing we can do about it. We don't know what they are. We have confirmed sighting by 2 aircrew, 4 of us, 2 planes, that said, look, this is not an airplane, this is not a weather balloon, this is not a blip. It has performance well beyond. And airplanes that we were flying at the time were literally brand new Super Hornets right out of the Boeing factory. I mean, these were brand new Block 2 series that came out. And you go, why wasn't something done? You don't know what it is. I think it's good now, the moves that have happened over the last year since the original article came out, that, you know, now there's a new reporting for the pilots. The Navy's acknowledged, hey, these things, we don't know what they were. You know, they're starting to take it serious, because, you know, there are other events that are not out, events where people have been called in to go, hey, I've seen this thing. So the investigation process is still going on. I will tell you that, I won't into specifics, but there are people inside the United States government that are taking this serious. And I've been down to D.C. twice to talk to folks because they want to hear the story. And I've got a lot of, you got to be joking. I mean, this happened, and I'm like, yeah, it did, and it is real. You know, what are you doing about it?
So what kind of people are you talking to?
High-level government officials is what I'll say. And most of that is because that conversation is between me and them, and I don't want people speculating, but you can say high-level officials I have talked to.
That was always the speculation about, like, what would do if they became president. Well, the first thing I would do is I would tell everybody about the UFOs. I would ask immediately what's going on. And I always thought about it, I said, how many people actually know what's going on? And how much of the information, I mean, it's not like, if they're dealing with something like this, like your experience, it seems like what you described is what is known. So it's this anomalous event where this thing defies our current understanding of technology, and then it's gone.
The fact that this object dropped from 80,000 feet to sea level in under a second, that's not a drone, it's not a balloon, and it sure as hell isn't a weather anomaly. It's something else entirely.
Yes.
And so what do you have? You don't have anything else other than that. Like, what other does anybody have?
Well, I would say this because I've talked to Bob. We did a
Bob Lazar.
Yeah, we did that together. And I'll leave it to everyone it's up to you to believe Bob. I'll say this: Bob's a normal guy. Bob's not crazy.
He's not crazy at all.
Not at all.
That was the weirdest thing about talking to him.
But when you look at it and go, because I had asked Bob, I said what he describes in the technology when he talks about his story. I said, well, do you honestly think we could, reverse engineer it? I said, how long do you think it would take us? And his response to me was another 100 years. He goes, Dave, it was so far beyond. He goes, the stuff that he says he worked on. He's like, he was on your podcast because I watched it. Hey, the wires, and because I had asked him when he said you first described the ship that he got to see. He said, I used to say, they built it and then it was like wax and you'd heat it up. He goes, now I would say it was built with 3D printing because now with 3D printing we can build things literally from the ground up, and it's basically built as one, not panels, no rivets. It's just made.
Right.
And so when you talk about that and you go, well, it's still another 100 years. So you go, well, what if you had the technology? We still, if what Bob says is correct, we still don't understand it. And how fast would it take us to understand that?
This is the kind of testimony that makes you stop laughing about UFOs and start wondering why more people aren't paying attention.
Well, there's probably something else out there, and I'm not crazy. I'm just opening up the possibility that we are not the only planet that has life on it.
I think people don't like to seem silly. They don't like to be foolish. And I think when people start talking about anything that's not proven or anything that's connected to a bunch of loony people that are making up stories, which UFOs certainly are.
Yes.
UFOs are connected to so many people that have made up so many stories. What was that gentleman's name from, what you would know, that guy? He was from another country, Billy something or another.
Billy Meyer.
Billy Meyer.
Myers, yeah.
Seems 100% full of shit.
Yeah, he used to have done tons of hoaxes with this, but here's the deal. Sometimes I think people have a real experience, and they're always like chasing that dragon, and they get UFO disease and their brain goes fucking berserk, right? I know that there are people that have had profound experiences and then they can't ever replicate them, so then they just start going crazy. And I don't blame them for it. But you got someone like Commander Fravor, when he saw that AAV, anomalous aerospace vehicle, his reaction was, I want to fly it. That's a pretty cool reaction. I'd like to fly it.
Yeah, imagine flying that thing.
But anyone who can fly a plane would be useful.
I can fly. I'm pilot.
Well, that's what I told my buddy, he was my XO at the time, Dell. I got back after all this happened. He looks at me and we're just standing in the ready room and he goes, hey, dude. I go, what? He goes, what do you think it is? I go, I have no idea, but it was pretty freaking impressive and I'd like to fly it.
Of course.
And he goes, yeah. I go, it was, it's just pot. You always want to fly the coolest thing.
Of course. Yeah, of course. You're a race car driver. You want to drive the fastest car.
That's it. And now you go, well, that's something we don't have.
Yeah.
This idea that, maybe alone that some of these other stars have planets that are maybe technologically advanced. So the next thing people say, and, new era, say, well, they're not coming here because the distance is so vast. Hold the fuck up. From the very beginning, when Bob Lazar came forward and talked about field propulsion, gravity propulsion, distance becomes completely irrelevant. So if we believe, and the radars are right, and Commander Fravor saw this thing moving like a ping pong ball in a glass of water, it's gravity propelled, that's why you can make those maneuvers without exploding, okay? Then distance completely irrelevant for travel. You're literally warping time and space. You're falling into place.
The idea that we could understand what some insanely impressive technology from a planet that is nowhere near us could manifest. It's nuts.
Yeah. Bob talks a lot about this. Remember, he's a young guy, right? In 1989, he gets shown something, and all of a sudden he's trying to interpret it through 1989 technology. So he said it looks like it was injection molded, because that's what he had. And then I sent him this thing about nanotechnology and working to atomic printer. He's like, dude, that makes a lot more sense. So he has to view it through where he saw it in 1989. However, I will say this: it is my knowledge that we understand exactly how these craft work. Our one limiting factor is our material science. We can't replicate, not the fuel source itself is another.
When you say we know exactly how they work.
Yeah, it doesn't for laws of physics. This concept of amplification of gravity, this concept of gravity propulsion, we understand how things can move from point A to point B almost instantaneously. Our physics doesn't disallow it, but our material science and the fuel to create that machine that we have machines from other places. So we have, Bob Lazar, whether you believe him or not, there was a program. I have other witnesses that I will be bringing forward about S4, where he worked. We have craft.
You have other witnesses that worked with alongside Bob?
No, people that corroborate Bob's account in that they saw him get on and off the red and whites, the Janet flights that come on. Somebody that went to Papoose Lake and was stopped by non-military guards at that time, people that were aware of Site 4 and ET exploitation projects. One is SR-71 pilot that I've been talking with for a couple years. So these people are coming forward now, and it's like I'm sick and tired of doing it. These little nitpicky things about Bob. Okay, there was a program. There was a back engineering program. They've admitted there are materials. So this is like the meta we heard about in the New York Times, all that. We have materials associated with UFOs that are interesting. They're studying them right now. There was just something on Fox about it. They're studying some of these materials and what they will find, because the ones they're talking about, I actually took to New Mexico and had 5 scientists study it about 5 years ago. I got my hands on it, got to study it. The famous parts they're talking about now. It's layered, and the way it's layered is what they're trying to see if it's anomalous elementally, or the way that the elements are bound together, and also the atomic level of layering is what's interesting. We'll find out if it's
explain what you're talking about. What is this thing that you saw?
Okay, well, there are a lot of different samples, but when you get a sample of something and you can see...
How big are these samples?
The ones that I looked at, they ranged from about this size down. They ranged from
orange.
Yeah, size of an orange to the size of a quarter. These are materials, right?
And are they materials from a crash?
So that's allegedly, or there's a known crash. This is in the public domain rather than government control. So what I was looking at, or having the scientists look at, is isotopically and elementally. What are the elements that are in this? Are they engineered?
And what's the conclusion?
Well, I'm not. I'm going to leave it to the people that are doing it now, who have much better machines than I had access to.
Do you know any cliff notes?
Yeah, they from what I understand, there's atomic layering. They're like we do with graphene. We lay down these layers that are basically oriented at a certain degree. That's how you get a superconductor or something like that. If you take a piece of graphene and it's highly machined, so doesn't deviate from that atomic layering, you can push it right through ice like a hot knife through butter. It's the weirdest feeling in the world, because you just take this piece of what feels like graphene and it just goes right through butter, because it's a superconductor, and the heat from your hand melts the ice. So that is a metamaterial. It doesn't occur naturally. Humans created it, and it has special properties because of the way it's atomically layered. So if these materials are from somewhere else, then we suspect that they're going to be highly machined, that they're going to be created for special use. So my whole point is our material science has not caught up with the physics that we understand for these field propulsion systems. I'm just telling you, believe me or not, but you'll hear more about it.
This next person is a deep cut for the real UFO tech heads. Harold Sonny White. Yes, that Sonny White was talking to Joe Rogan about warp drives, non-human crafts, and what he may or may not have seen at NASA and beyond. If you don't know who Sonny White is, he is the physicist who literally ran NASA's warp drive research program. And in this clip, he's hinting at some truly wild stuff.
Yeah. When you hear about stories about these fighter pilots finding these objects in the sky that exhibit extraordinary capabilities and don't have all the signatures of traditional propulsion systems. What is your thoughts?
Generally, I tend to be agnostic to the topic. I have a lot of friends that are extremely interested in a lot of things that are out and about in the media and in the literature. Generally, I tend to be agnostic, and here's why. In everything that's currently out that people talk about and highlight, it's difficult for me to take the data and the evidence and then pull that into the work that we do in the lab with some of the different test devices we work with as we explore the frontiers of where physics and propulsion might intersect. It's hard to take that and turn that into some kind of an action plan, if you will. So I'm certainly aware, like David Fravor, the experience that he had with, I think he calls them Tic Tacs, right? An amazing account. And there's multiple people that saw it, multiple platforms that saw it. And so to start with, right, I thought maybe there was a small chance that was just like we have stealth technology, right, where if you want to hide a plane, what if we had the ability to project something, right, through some mechanism where we could make people go where we wanted them to go, right? Because I know there's a technology that uses two different lasers that triangulate a certain point in open air, and they put enough energy into a particular location that they ionize the air, and so it creates like a bright pixel. And so they use that to create three-dimensional displays that look like they're just floating out in air. Now, they're not quite as big as what we saw described with the Nimitz encounter on the West Coast. So I thought for a little while, maybe that might be something that we're seeing.
They can project plasma as well, right? Is that the same thing?
It's the same thing, right? So the two lasers intersect, they ionize the air, which creates a plasma.
And
right?
they can do this over long distances as well, right?
I don't know about long distances. I know they can do it over short distances.
Okay.
And so for a while there, I wondered if that might be something that could explain some of what
that makes sense.
What David Fravor and the group saw.
Sonny White doesn't sound like a conspiracy theorist. He sounds like a guy who's seen some files he can't talk about, and that is way more unsettling to me.
The only problem would be the radar, because I don't know if you wouldn't pick up that on radar, would you? Because it's not a mass, right?
So the plasma would certainly absorb a radar signal, right? Because it's gonna polarize any electromagnetic wave that tries to go through.
So it would show up?
It might. It might.
Would it be possible to make something that big, that's 20 feet long of that?
It's hard for me to imagine that.
Right.
But I think there's one piece of data that just came out in the last few weeks. I think David Fravor's wingman, Alex, I think her name is Alex Dietrich. I can't remember the name.
I think you're right.
So she came out, and so in all the things associated with that particular encounter, right, one of the things I've been trying to figure out is how do they describe the specular surface of the Tic Tac, right? Because if it's these plasma pixels that I'm talking about that creates a volumetric display, I would speculate it might be a glowy looking thing. But I think Alex, in her account, described it as a flat type of mat. So that torpedoed my working theory. So, but again, while it's amazing and incredible, and it's something that people want to go think about and go try and collect more data, it doesn't help me do what I'm doing in the lab. And so I think I keep my eyes dart every once in a while over to that particular topic. Oh, what's that about? That's interesting.
I'm honestly agnostic as well. I bounce back and forth from being really excited about it to feel like I'm being duped all the time. Jamie and I talk about it all the time. I'm back in.
Hal Puthoff, although he's got a lot of many and varied interests, he's a great physicist. He's published a lot of great papers in the literature just thinking about physics, right? He's got some stuff he's looked at called the polarizable vacuum. So my drawer of preferred papers, I have a number of papers in there that are from Hal's work on the polarizable vacuum, because I find that interesting and fascinating. And so there may be some things out there that are adjacent to the concept where you could try and pull some of that together, I guess.
Well, that's a fascinating thing for you to say, because Hal believes they have them. Believes that we have 10 of them.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I know that.
Which is just so nuts. And then he's a little agnostic on the Bob Lazar story. But the Bob Lazar story, which I'm sure you're aware of, is essentially what we're talking about. You would bring in some out-of-the-box thinkers And if you found some wildly intelligent young scientist who put a rocket engine in the back of a Honda, which is what he did, you would go, what is that crazy fucker up to? Let's have him look at it. What's it hurt?
Right.
The guys at Rocketdyne say he's a wizard.
Right.
Bring him out there. Or the guys at wherever he wasn't at Rocketdyne. He was at Los Alamos. The guys at Los Alamos said he's a wizard. So let's bring him out here. Let's see what's going on.
His story is I'm not too familiar with it, right?
It's the nuttiest story of all time. Yeah. And he supposedly, well, they denied that he ever worked at Los Alamos, but then they found him on an employee log. And not only that, he knew the outline of the place. He knew the security people. George Knapp took him on a tour of it, and he knew everybody. He knew the people that worked there. He knew how to get around. Clearly worked there. So that's interesting that they tried to deny that he ever worked there. And then from there, he gets this job where he is flown out to the desert to Area 51 Site 4. And this is allegedly, right? During this time, he can't even tell his wife what he's doing. So his wife thinks he's going having affairs. He's got to leave and fly away at 11 p.m. at night. Right, but you can't tell me where you're going. You want to work? Right.
Yeah, you're working late again?
The wife starts having an affair. And because of his
This
clearance...
almost sounds like a movie, right?
It does sound like a movie, which is one of the beautiful things about reality, is that reality seems so fake that sometimes actual true stories are bizarrely fictional. So his wife starts having an affair. Because of his clearance, he cannot be working on these things if he could be under extreme emotional duress. So they fire him. They tell him he can't. They don't give him any explanation. They don't tell him his wife's cheating on him. He starts taking people out to the desert, explaining to them, you have to see what we're working on. They fly this thing on certain nights, and they do these test flights around the base. It's nuts. So he takes these people into this area. They see it. They get arrested. When he gets arrested, he gets caught there. He explains what he was doing. He says, I've got to go public or they're going to kill me. So he goes public with George Knapp. Initially, they hide his face, and then he says, you know what, fuck that. Let's just film me. Let me tell you everything. He goes over the diagram of this device, and he calls it the sport model, and it looks like that. That thing that we have there is...
it's almost like a hubcap, right? But
it's a copy of it. In the middle of that thing is some sort of a generator that he said works on this unknown element, this element 115.
Oh, some of this is coming back to me. I think I've seen some stuff over the years.
Yes.
Some of it's coming back to me now.
And essentially the way he describes it traveling, and again, this is in the 1980s, the way he describes it traveling is exactly the way you describe that sort of warp drive, changing space and time around it, and that you would point that thing where you wanted to go, and it would just...
Yeah, it all sounds very surreal, right? There's another story. Again, as I said, I have a number of friends that are keenly interested in this, and so I've been exposed to some of the different things. And that to me, the Tic Tac account is interesting because it's got a lot of rigorous data, if you will, that helps you go, well, I can't explain that, I can't explain that, I can't explain that. There is another accounting that I just put in the category, my brain doesn't even know what to make of it, and it's a concept of Rendlesham Forest. I don't know if that rings a bell. There's something over in the UK where there's a base over there, and some airmen came across some very weird... I can't even begin to describe.
Not sure if I know this one.
It's pretty bizarre. I don't know it well enough to unpack it today, other than to say it's so bizarre that when you listen to the accounts that were recorded, right, it doesn't make any sense. It's if you think about if you watch an octopus in an aquarium, right, and the octopus is doing something, you can sometimes understand what their motivation is. There's a cross-species ability to, it's communication but without words, right? That octopus wants to go eat that little crab or whatever the case may be. And so our chemical computers, even though they're different, we can look at their behavior and we can go, all right, I think I understand what that octopus might be wanting to do today, or a shark or a dog or a porpoise. But when you hear what happened in that Rendlesham Forest thing, it breaks all of my guessing machine. And I
what is the story?
The colonel and some airmen reported some weird stuff that was going on in Rendlesham Forest, and they went out and tried to investigate it, and they saw some... Again, I'm doing such a terrible job of summarizing it because I don't really know the lore very well, but...
Here it is right here.
Everything they saw was very bizarre and crazy looking.
We can read it.
Right?
The way he just casually talks about this non-human craft, like this is just standard shop talk, either he's deep in the sci-fi sauce or he knows something that we don't know.
It says 40 years ago, a remote forest in Suffolk was the scene of one of the most famous purported UFO sightings in history. So just what did happen, and will we ever know for sure? Victor Thurnkettle was out chopping wood one morning in Rendlesham Forest in late December 1980 when a car drew up. Out stepped two men, aged about 30, dressed in suits. "Good morning. Do you mind if we ask you some questions?" asked one in a well-spoken English accent. Earlier, on 26 and 28 of December, United States Air Force security personnel stationed at nearby RAF Woodbridge had reported seeing strange lights in the surrounding forest. Forestry worker Mr. Thurnkettle, unannounced and unidentified visitors asked if he had been out the previous night. I said no, he recalls. They said, "Did you leave the house at all? Did you see anything?" I said, "What?" They said, "Oh, there's a report of some red lights in the forest. We're just checking." And the two men, very politely but firmly, asked me probably about 20 questions. I thought they were journalists. They suddenly said, "Oh, well, fair enough. There's probably nothing in it," and left. So I bought the papers every day for the next few days to find out what was going on, and of course, there was nothing. 3 years later, however, sightings made the news of the world front page story. It proclaimed UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official. The story was based on a memo from Woodbridge Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt to the Ministry of Defense. It was released by the U.S. government, described as an encounter with an apparent UFO in the forest. Since then, the sightings have been the source of much debate and speculation among UFO enthusiasts and the subject of numerous books, articles, and TV programs. In March, a documentary concluded the sightings had achieved legend status like the Loch Ness or King Arthur. The forest even has its own official UFO trail, complete with a life-size replica, go back up, of the flying saucer. And this is the replica with like the thing on it, that hand thing. Bizarre. Thurnkettle, UK authorities have said they didn't learn about the incident. Okay, what was the story though? Let's get to what is the story? Scroll down more. What does it say?
Yeah, and that gets into the stuff that it doesn't make sense in terms of what they describe the UFO doing. It's just very peculiar, right? So
yeah, my heart absolutely plummeted. There was nothing. It was an absolute normal glade in the forest with 3 rabbit scrapes. They're all carefully marked. It happened to be roughly a triangle. Okay, what else does it say? What is the sighting? Burn marks on trees, but what's the sighting?
What the UFO looked like, but
okay, sure. They said it looked like, yeah. Whoa. And it had those markings on it?
I Googled it. My Google search said that Grush brought it up when he was on here, but I couldn't find even about it, so I don't know that we went that deep into it.
How bizarre is it that it has that symbol? What is that? That's an ancient Hindu symbol, correct? That Hamza symbol?
I don't know.
Oh, they're different. Yeah. That looks very weird. Huh. So about this one stands out to you?
I put this one in the category of I don't understand if it's a real account, right? I mean, so I think when you have a lieutenant colonel that's reporting something as factual, I tend not to just immediately dismiss it.
Right.
But and it's not just him; it's several people around him. What they described, right, doesn't make sense to me, right? Mm-hmm. You know, the David Fravor talking about the Tic Tac, I can kind of not totally alien to me. I could, it's trying to maneuver with the aircraft and it's maneuvering to their cap or whatever the case may be. And I can kind of dots with that. But the Rendlesham Forest thing, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, what about it doesn't make any sense?
What they saw, why it was doing what it was doing.
What was it doing?
It just was out in the woods. It was out in the woods, lights and doing weird stuff.
Reminder, this isn't just a random YouTuber speculating on aliens. This is a NASA scientist who ran experiments on bending space-time. This clip is the perfect example of how science and speculation are starting to blur, because the people who used to laugh at stuff like this are now cautiously leaning into it. Alright, this next one's pretty funny. It's Joe Rogan and Joey Diaz talking about UFOs, aliens, and government cover-ups. Let's just get into it.
You imagine you're hanging out with Trump, and he's like, "You want to see the UFO? Can you keep a secret?" There he is, hanging out with Nixon. And they supposedly do have something that crashed, and they supposedly do have biological entities that are on ice somewhere. This is according to these whistleblowers that work for the government, and now we're talking about it. I just don't know what's real. It's hard to know. And you talk about it, you feel like a moron.
There's got to be something out there. We have to assume there's something out there. Whether or not, I don't even know.
Right, but should we assume that something's been here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so.
They've been here.
Well, I would come here. If I was from somewhere else and I was like, what, imagine if you're from some super advanced civilization that's completely abandoned war. There's no thievery. Everybody reads everybody's minds. There's no unfairness because they've worked all that stuff out. And it's just superior intellect because everybody's evolved for 1 million years past where we are now. And you get the opportunity to see what a breakthrough civilization looks like, right when they're figuring out nuclear power, right when they're figuring out flight and war and cell phones and shit like that. That would be like you and I going back and going and visiting the real Wild West, being in a gold mining town in 1830. Nuts that would be. Fucking crazy. Be one of the minor 49ers in 1849, going all the way to San Francisco, and these fucking animals stabbing each other in saloons. You know what that would be like?
That's insane.
The kind of barbarians that took a chance with wooden wheels getting pulled by a horse and went across mountain ranges to try to get to the gold. That would be like us going to visit that. Of course we would visit that. Of course. If you had a chance to see what it would like to see Christopher Columbus land in the Bahamas, to see what that must have been like, of course you would want to see it. If you could go literally back in time and see primitive humans, well, if they're just like us, but they're like us millions of years from now, of course they would want to visit us. It would be so interesting. Can you imagine if there was a planet where we could go, where we could see cavemen?
We'd go.
Would you imagine?
Fucking Musk would get us in an hour. But it's...
Well, you can see guys making fucking arrowheads with flint for the first time and strapping them to sticks, giant fucking heads and big teeth and covered in hair, just figuring out tools. Oh my God, we would be fascinated by those people.
The way I think about it is, listen, since I'm a kid, we're talking about Martians and aliens, right? Since I'm fucking 6, 7, I've been hearing about this. The moon landing was in 69, so I was 6. So it started after that. I heard more and more about it. So what you mean to tell me is in 55 years we haven't found out more information about it? We know. We know what's going on. We know. NASA's not stupid. They know something's out there. They play with us a little bit from time to time. But there's something out there, my friend.
I think so, too.
There's something out there.
I think the other problem with the president knowing, and they keep things from the president? Of course they can. The president is only there for 4 years. And then he has to get in there again. And if he wins, he's only there for 4 more years. These fucking people have 30-year careers, 50-year careers in the intelligence agencies.
They know.
If they know something, and they've known something since fucking Gerald Ford, why would they tell you? Why do you need to know? We've already been hiding this from the population for so long.
And those old timers didn't need a, what's that when you have to sign something?
NDA?
Like that NDA, whatever the fuck.
There was no NDAs back then.
There's no NDAs back then. So there was something to it. You got that place in New Mexico. You got Hudson County, what we discussed before, with the Martians landing. You have all these places that have a higher volume. I wonder what's number 2 in UFO sightings.
I wonder what's number 1. What's number 1? Is it Hudson Valley?
Yeah, Hudson Valley by the George Washington Bridge, that whole thing.
That's crazy.
That's number 1. I wonder what number 2, number 3, and number 4 is.
It's interesting that a lot of them are over near where the ocean is. Because that's one of the big theories, that they have bases in the ocean. Because the reality of the ocean is no one's looking. If you have something on Earth, satellites can see it. If you have something that's in the middle of Nevada, in some deserted area, and you have buildings, satellites can see that. They can see the structures. So you have to hide them. But if you have something in the ocean, nobody sees anything. We've only explored, what is the percentage of the ocean floor that we have just explored? I think it's 10%. I think it's somewhere around 10, maybe 20%. So that means that 80% of the ocean floor is undiscovered. We have no idea what's down there. And it's a mile, 2 miles deep in some spots. If you're from a super sophisticated civilization that's millions of light years away, and you can come here instantaneously, and you have the ability to traverse in these what they call transmedium craft, which means they can go through air, go through water, it creates a gravity bubble around it and go through everything. That's what they think these things are doing. That's what they can go 500 knots underwater. Nothing we have could do that. And if they have bases under the ocean, it makes sense that these sightings are all near the ocean. It just totally makes sense.
A lot happens in the ocean. That ocean's stronger than what you fucking think. I love going to a beach and just sitting on the beach, watching the ocean.
2030.
Seabed 2030, what they've mapped out?
They've gotten 30% mapped. They're trying to get the whole thing done by 2030.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Oh, what if they find a base?
Yeah. So
what if they get down there and they find bases? What is all that stuff? What are those lines?
I'm guessing that's where they probably sent their drones. Probably.
Whoa!
Looks like a pool scrubber.
That's crazy!
Holy shit.
Our next clip features legendary investigator Jacques Vallée and filmmaker James Fox. If you're into UFOs, government secrecies, or even the possibility that we're not alone, this is an essential episode to Joe Rogan. Vallee isn't just another expert, he is the guy who helped shape modern UFO research with his connections to Project Blue Book and beyond, and James Fox is the mind behind documentaries like The Phenomenon, and he brings the receipts, he interviews everybody, and he somehow has some sort of inside access for him to get all this information. Here they are talking about the Zimbabwe UFO encounter, where a bunch of school children allegedly were face to face with aliens.
I was doing my first documentary back in 1997 when I was just naive enough to think I can get an interview with Steven Spielberg. We had a mutual friend involved, this woman Janet, and she gets back to me and she's like, so Spielberg's definitely not going to meet with you, but he knows you're working on this UFO documentary. He thinks you should look into this landing case that happened in Africa at the school. And I said to myself at the time, and remind you guys that I was making a film on UFOs, and I dismissed it so quickly because I thought, there's no way that a mass landing with the sheer volume of eyewitness testimony at a school in broad daylight could happen and the whole world not know about it. So I just walked away from that story for about 10 years. 10 years later, I'm doing an event at the National Press Club with Leslie Kean, who was part of the article in New York Times that came out in 2017. And she introduced me to this guy, Nickerson. And she's like, oh, he's working on this landing case in Africa. Long story short, working on a film, nothing is coming out next year, specifically on just that case. Fravor is producing it. And he said, working on the case, and if you want to do something with me on it, a small piece, I could. So I got back into it. I licensed some of the footage that Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist that came and interviewed the school children on camera within a week of it happening. He unfortunately looked the wrong way in London, got run down by a car and died. So I contacted the Institute with the help of Randall Nickerson. I licensed the archival footage. We tracked down the witnesses today. We flew them in from all different corners of the world, brought them together. A lot of them were standing right next to each other. They came face to face, and one of the things I realized was that there were roughly 100 kids in the playground, broad daylight, aerial school, Ruwa, Zimbabwe, 1994, and they got within arms, some of them within arm's length of these beings, and brought these witnesses together for the first time in 20 years, and a lot of them hadn't even told their others, just because they said they were tired of having to defend this. And I myself didn't believe it when I first heard about it back in 1997, and that segment of the film is the most, in my opinion, is the most powerful segment, because
it's very compelling.
You've got all these children saying what they saw on camera after it happened, and then you see them 20 years later, and then we go to Africa and we meet with the headmistress, or she was a teacher at the time. We meet with other witnesses. We go to the landing site. We talk to people at the school. That case is absolutely, and it was witnessed by lots of other people in and around the area for several days before it chose a school to land.
It's so compelling because the children are all clearly, they're not actors, so as they're adults later, they're all talking about this moment, and it's like they had a religious experience together, like all sharing it and talking about it, and you could tell it's like it's a deeply moving experience. If they were actors, they wouldn't have been able to do such a good job, because to convey the reality of that moment to them, to be able to have this interpretation of this event where they're all consistent in the story and they're all clearly still shook by this moment. It's really interesting, because if you had that scene in a movie, it would take like a really good actor to pull it off, and they'd probably need multiple takes. They'd probably want to get the best one. But those kids, the way they were talking about it and the way they were drawing it, you're like, wow, it really does seem like something happened to them.
I know how credible that the testimony of the children is, because my partner Rebecca, she's never had much of an interest in what I do, making documentaries on UFOs. I do other things as well, but when I was reviewing in the studio the archival interview of the children, she just dropped off a cup of coffee and she stopped and went, oh my God, those children are not lying. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Because look, I ask your audience to don't take it from me. Just suspend judgment for a moment and imagine, hypothetically, if a UFO or several UFOs landed at a school in broad daylight in Rua, Zimbabwe, Africa, and interacted telepathically with nearly 100 school children. Not all of them had telepathic, but seen the incident. How significant of a story would you give that?
Well, not only that, they had the same message.
Yes.
What the telepathic message was that technology is a real problem.
Yes.
And there's things that people are doing with technology that are going to ruin the earth.
Yes.
And they were trying to relay this to children, which is very strange.
Yes.
You just thought they were adults because they were the same size as the aliens. I mean, you think they knew that they were children? Do you think they understood that it was a school? All speculation, right?
No, I definitely had to ask myself, look, during the production of the film, Paula Harris actually turned me on to another landing case that happened in Australia in 1966 at a school. And this time there were roughly 300 witnesses that saw a disc land outside a playground in Australia. And we went to Australia and investigated that case, went to the landing site, talked to eyewitness testimony, people that jumped the fence at the school playground and ran over to where this thing landed. And then we even interviewed a guy who snapped a photograph of a disc, a Polaroid, back in 1966, 2 days prior to the incident. So it's very that we have photographic evidence, we have testimony, and for the first time we've got testimony from a science teacher. So why do these things land at schools? It seems like, and I'm just totally speculating here, but it seems like if I were going to do that, it seems like a pretty benign environment. When you have testimony from military guys that we take a fairly hostile position towards penetrate sensitive military installations, and maybe, I'm just saying, maybe
it's safe.
Maybe it's safe.
Maybe
but
it's safe.
we have to stop reacting to by UFOs as a threat. And the whole thing behind this new task force, and as much as I respect task force colleagues and I want to cooperate with them to the extent that we can bring information or resources to what they do, but there is more. This should not be looked at specifically as a threat. I mean, with the phenomena that we observe, and they wanted to blow up those F-18s, they could do it, okay? Obviously, that's not what it's all about. And this idea of just labeling it all as a threat because it's unknown, that's a wrong idea. 90% of the information comes from the public, comes from children, and very, very little of it is made up. In France, I mean, the data we get, the French Space Agency comes through channels where if people reported something that's found to be untrue, they're going to be called by the police.
And just when you thought it couldn't get any deeper, Jacques Vallée returns. This time solo, with even more unsettling revelations. So let's pick up where the mystery left off.
There was to my knowledge, there hasn't been any correlation of that. And the creatures that are described in Socorro in New Mexico and in Valençol in France, so those are three cases that I've been very involved in from the beginning, from day one, involve creatures that are about 3 feet tall, that breathe our air,
hairless,
recognize our signals, communicate with us in funny ways, even mentally. Witnesses describe getting images in their minds and so on, in all three cases. And what's interesting is people can argue about Trinity all they want. They argue about Roswell. But the case in Socorro and the case in France, in Valençol, were investigated by governments, not by a local UFO group, although the local UFO group did a good job in all those cases. But they were, in Socorro, it was first the local police, the local policemen saw the craft and the beings and described what happened. He was terrified, but when the thing took off, he thought it was something to do with some new gadget or some work in the desert. It's an area that's still in the same state today. I've gone back there with Dr. Hynek's son, with Paul Hynek, a few months ago. I've gone several times there. And so after the police, it turned out the FBI was in town on another case. They had no jurisdiction in New Mexico for that particular case. It wasn't a federal case, but they helped preserve the traces the FBI way. And the local police was happy to have them there. And then there was the state police came in and did an investigation, and then people from the base came in with experts in explosives, experts in recovery of weapons and rockets and so on, because they thought it might be something that had come from the Trinity Range that was out of its way and had crashed near Socorro, in which case they might have responsibility, including financial responsibility if something was destroyed or whatever. So this was very serious. I have the whole file. It's a big file.
Right.
Nobody's looking at it. The investigation in Washington now, they are saying, we're going to look at the cases of the last 12 months. Well, what kind of science is that? Can you imagine scientists reading this? And this is the way they are going to solve the UFO problem by looking at vague pictures of lights in the sky for 1 year? Why don't they go back to those records? Those are federal records. The case in Valençol, 5 agencies of the French government. So this guy was a farmer. He had a field where he was growing plants to make perfume. So this was high-level, expensive crop. This wasn't just alfalfa or something. And he goes there at 5 o'clock in the morning because he wants to do to water the thing and so on before the sun is up, because it's going to be in the south of France, it's going to be very hot. You can't work in the field during the early afternoon. So he wants to be done with that. He sees this contraption in the middle of the field crushing the plants. And so he sneaks in and he's paralyzed. Now, there is an egg-shaped object, just like the one at Trinity, just like the one in Socorro. It's the size of a mid-sized truck. There are 2 creatures in front of it, human-looking, 2 eyes, breathing air. They look at him, sort of amused, and one of them has something on his belt. He takes out, pointed at him, and that's when he's paralyzed. Now, he's not, and as you know, I'm not a doctor, but I've gone to doctors about what kind of paralysis is that, where you can stand up and watch something, you just can't move. They said, well, there is a type of paralysis that will just inhibit the motor nerves, where but you'll still be up and aware. You're not going to fall down, in a heap. And from there, he sees them going back inside the thing. The thing takes off. It takes off like a shot out of a gun, and it vanishes in midair. Now, he goes to see the gendarmes. This man is fairly wealthy. He owns quite a bit of several fields, expensive crops. His wife is the mayor of the town. The gendarmes are going to be very careful with him because he's also from the resistance in World War II. When he was young, he joined the resistance, and the resistance in that part of France fought in the Alps against the Germans, and they were regarded as heroes of World War II. And the gendarmes are very careful with him. There are some things he's not going to tell the gendarmes because he thinks, and I went there, he didn't want to talk to anybody from Paris. He didn't want to be on TV. He wanted to concentrate on his experience because he thought there was going to be something else. And he was aware of some of his buddies. Now, this is a part of France where people talk, but they have secrets too. I mean, that in the U.S., people are not going to talk to strangers.
Right.
The only reason I could go there was that I went there with a lady who was from Paris, with the government. She was with de Gaulle's government. She had the rank of ambassador, and she had a vacation home there. So we went there for 3 days, and she knew everybody there. And he asked what he thought might happen again. And he didn't want the gendarmes mixed in with what he was doing.
Why did he think that something was going to happen again?
They evidently, and it's a secrecy about what it was, but evidently there was communication with the beings when he was there.
And so these beings, just tiny, look like people. Did they have different features than us? Or was it just human
They are
features?
just like the ones at Trinity and like the ones at Socorro. So in that book you have actually 2 and 3, you have 7 creatures that are humanoid, that breathe our air, that seem to understand us, contact. Well, have visual contact with animals. I mean, they are human or meta-human, but there is messages that come through all of that that the witnesses are reluctant to talk about in all 3 cases. So in Socorro, finally, the Air Force went there. They threw the Air Force out because the Air Force said, well, a gadget, from the base, and stupid. So they finally sent Dr. Hynek there. And Dr. Hynek asked me to organize the files that were coming. I was at Northwestern at the time, I had done my PhD already, and I was on the staff of the computing center, and we had a small team trying to help Hynek keep the files together. So we were, with him the whole time, and then I put the files together, and I have the file, the official file.
So these people were reluctant to talk about what these creatures were communicating with them. But did they talk about it at all?
It was very personal.
Very personal.
Yeah. There had been a communication that transcended their life. There was something else, something outside. So you could almost call it a sort of a religious feeling, but it wasn't. It wasn't about divinity or God specifically, but it was about the side of life, some bigger meaning for life. That's their interpretation. It may not be. There may be other things that they are trying to communicate.
But it was very profound for them.
Yes.
And all 3 cases had similar stories in that regard.
And in all 3 cases, there are traces that were measured. There were, technology of sort. And in the case of Socorro, people came up with all kinds of ideas that maybe it was a balloon, a special balloon, right? There were only 12 of them in the world and so on. Well, in the book, people haven't noticed it, but in the book, I was able to solve that problem because I found a transcript of a conversation with a man who was head of a motor pool at at Sands. And he had given his team some instructions on, make sure that the motor pool was working really well, because White Sands is so big. When people went home, they got lost, White Sands. And then how are you going to find them? I mean, tracks, but there is no paved road at the time. How are you going to, so you can launch a helicopter the next day looking for, a car somewhere with a family in it. But so he made rules that had to call periodically to report where they were when they went home, away across the desert. So he could find them if there was something wrong with the car. He's driving home with his family. This is after the Socorro thing is done, interrogating the Lonnie Zamora, the cop who was driving that thing. And he sees a light over the mountains in the southwest towards Mexico. But it's still, in New Mexico, but it's in that direction. Light that's not a star, it's really bright. And the light gets brighter and brighter, and his car dies. Now, he's head of a motor pool for the base. Everybody reports to him, and they have all the, army cars and the trucks and everything else, the half-tracks. So he did that thing. He to call his team. The radio doesn't work. Radio should work. Radio doesn't work. And the thing gets very bright, and then it recedes. It goes away the way it currently came in. We don't know if it came in or if it just got bright. Okay, so the car starts. He goes home, and then the next day he goes to his shop. He gets his staff together. He says, "You guys are going to take this car apart. I want to see every screw and every piece of it and every level and everything and the seats and so on. I want to see all of that on the floor. And you're going to test it, and you're going to tell me what's changed or, if anything, how that car stopped in the middle of the desert." And they couldn't find anything. And that report was an official report, okay, that was never published. And it nails the whole thing, you know. It was not a balloon. This was not an hallucination. The patrolman wasn't drunk like they used to have, or making up a story and so on.
Up next, we have the mind-bending Dr. Hal Puthoff, the CIA's remote viewing pioneer. He is a Stanford physicist and one of the rare voices from the government side of things who's willing to discuss non-human intelligence and UFO tech on the air. Also, side note, link below will be the book Phenomenon by Annie Jacobson. It is one of the best reads I have ever had, and Puthoff is one of the main characters that they follow in that story. So let's just jump into it.
What are these companies going to do? They've been hiding things, or various parts of the government have been hiding things.
Misappropriating funds, lying to Congress.
Lying to Congress. So you can see why it's such a big problem at this point.
Well, that was that disclosure documentary that I saw you in as well, that appeared at South by Southwest, which was excellent. What is it called?
It's called The Age of Disclosure.
Amazing documentary.
It's an amazing documentary.
Really hope that gets released somewhere big, like Netflix or something like that, so people can see it.
I think Dan Farah, who's the director and producer of that, by the way, a very well-known producer. He collaborated with Steven Spielberg on Ready Player One, which was the big hit and so on. And the approach he used, which is really very clever, he contacted people like me, people like Lou Elizondo, on and on and on, and said, many of you don't want to come out really and reveal too much, podcast by podcast by podcast. So tell you what, my goal, he says, I'm going to approach 38 of the maximum insiders. And by maximum insiders, it includes people like Senator Rubio, who's now Secretary of State, Clapper, and I'm going to get all of you to collaborate on saying what your involvement was, to the degree you can, and not say something and end up going to jail. And then we'll put out maximum disclosure evidence all at one time in this film. And it'll include people coming forward like Jay Stratton, who is head of the UAP task force. He's been involved in this field for 16 years. By the way, he has a book about to come out also, which will really be a disclosure. So anyways, we'll put this together. We won't talk about it along the way. And so 38 of us ended up being interviewed for the film, telling whatever role we felt we could tell. So in fact, when that film comes out, that's going to be disclosure on steroids, I think. That's going to be the maximum, and well, you saw the film, so it's pretty revealing.
It's very well done.
Very well done.
So for your own personal journey into this stuff, you were initially introduced to it because they're talking about disclosure. You rate the pros and cons, and then when do you get introduced to it again?
Well, it was when Robert Bigelow got the contract that Harry Reid and the other senators asked.
And how much time has passed?
Well, that was in 2008.
So a couple.
And so that went up through 2012. And then ATIP, which you may have heard of, that Lou Elizondo ran, picked up there to keep the ball rolling forward. And now it's been revealed, by the way, only recently, that when the funding dried up, it dried up for the reasons you might think of, and that is it was so highly classified that when congressional statements came down that we need so much money for this, It didn't actually describe, it would just advance propulsion and all that kind of stuff. So another group picked up the money and said, oh, well, that's what we're working on, propulsion things, but it wasn't the real deal. And so what do you do at that point? Do you go, no, wait a minute, this was really for this? Well, no, then you'd be revealing what this was really for. So anyway, that sort of ended that way. But anyway, so based on that, we then, as a group, went to, as it turns out, the Department of Homeland Security to set up a whole new program. And it was going to be a special access program. It was under a name which can now be revealed because AERO, the Advanced Aerospace, that's the Advanced Anomalies Aerospace Resolution Office, has revealed it. It was called Kona Blue. And we built up a stack of documents that would go to the ceiling here about what needed to be done, what we were going to do, how it should be done, who should be involved.
So at this point, you're convinced that this is a real phenomenon?
At this point, I'm convinced that there's a real phenomena. How far can I go? I can say I interacted with, for example, Dave Grush, that you've had on your program before, who is really a high-level intelligence officer. People in the public can hardly have any idea how high a level intelligence officer he was. He prepared briefings for the president. He was a top UAP investigator for NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, and then transferred over to the National Geospatial Intelligence Office and so on. And so in that role, he was asked, he was an official, part of the UAP task force, asked by Jay Stratton to find out what's going on behind the scenes at these super classified levels. And he did. And so that's why he eventually came out in that August 2023 hearing under oath saying, yep, I've talked to more than 40 people who are directly involved in the program. Well, I know Dave, I know many of the people, I know many of the programs that he's involved in. And so there really is something to it. And it's only a matter of time before it comes out. I don't think you can put the toothpaste back into the tube, frankly.
Well, it seems like people don't want to. And I think there's so many more people that are openly discussing the possibility or what this is. Maybe not even the possibility of it, but addressing that there's something going on. So what is it? Is it interdimensional? Is it intergalactic? Like, what is it?
That's just such an excellent question. Because the problem is there's an embarrassment of riches. These craft, in the old days, in the fields, that someone was streaking across the sky and you don't know what to think, you could sort of blow it off. But because our own detection equipment has really marched up into unbelievable sophistication, so now we have these really advanced sensor systems, FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, high-quality radars, satellites. Ratcliffe has admitted that satellites have picked up of these craft, and these craft have interfered with exercises, as we all know from the Nimitz and the Gimbal and the Go Fast videos that went out into the public in 2017. It's really out there now at this point that there's a reality here, and so. Where we are at this point.
Well, one of the more spectacular ones you about the Nimitz, the Commander David Fravor experience. So they're flying over the water outside of San Diego.
Outside San Diego,
and they think they see something below the surface, and which is large, and then this 20-foot tic-tac looking thing that's hovering over the water. That seems to turn towards them and recognize that it jams their radar. It does something to block their ability to detect it. They have it on screen. They have video of this thing. There's eyewitnesses of this thing. They track it on radar going from above 50,000 feet down to sea level in a second. They don't know what it is. It takes off at an insane rate of speed. It goes to the cat point where they were supposed to meet up. So they have all this data about this thing that behaves in a way that's impossible with our current understanding of propulsion systems.
Right. And, of course, in the program, we interviewed pilots about their experiences and so on. And so you can't blame a pilot. He says, look, this thing was at feet or whatever when he first detected it. Suddenly it's down there right above the water. and then it takes off and does a right angle turn at Mach 3. Stuff is just way beyond our physics. Of course, to a physics nerd like me, so yeah, wait a minute. If it's real, it's physics. So
right,
it can't be beyond our physics. It's
beyond our understanding.
But it's beyond our engineering. So in fact, in that series of papers I showed you, that of the 38 papers, by the way, little side story there, it's interesting. And those 38 papers were then posted. None of these people who generated those papers had any idea it had to do with ETs or UFOs or whatever. Went up on what's called the JWIC server. It's a classified server for the Pentagon, and intelligence officers and aerospace contractors had access, but nobody in the public could. And usually those things go up, and they're up for a little while, and a month or so, and they take them down. This was such a popular set, this 38 papers, such a popular set, that everybody screamed every time they tried to take it down. And so it was posted there, like forever. Eventually, Freedom of Information Act and so on, most of those papers have released. And I was concerned that, oh my God, these guys are all going to call me up and say, what? You didn't tell me this had anything to do with ETs or UFOs? But actually, nobody seemed to complain about it. So back to the question that you mentioned a little earlier, though, about the source of this. Like I said, it's an embarrassment of riches. There's so much observation. The idea that it may be a scout coming by from some other planet and checking us out and heading off or whatever. I'm much more than that. And of course, as you know, interviewing Jacques Vallée, he dug into the literature and found out you can go back millennia and see descriptions of exactly what we're talking about today. So as far as where they come from or what they're doing here, I myself have written a paper called Ultra-Terrestrials, where I try to cover the gamut. And I cover everything, Could be spacecraft from some other galaxy whipping through here. Maybe there's some Atlanteans left over from eons ago, and they're just kind of out in the seabed or on some mountain range someplace. Or maybe some ET group showed up here 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and they're hiding out with some bases locally and so on. Of course, we have a fellow by the name of, a professor by the name of Masters who thinks that, well, maybe it's travelers from the future coming back. And then there's the whole idea, since physicists like to talk about additional dimensions, they come from another. So anyway, then in my ultra-terrestrials paper, I list everyone I can think of and say, to be exploring all of these. So at this point, I would say we know it's NHI, non-human intelligence, but it's not clear what the source is. Maybe at a higher level of classification than I had access to, and maybe it's known, but right now, I'd say we don't.
Do you have a
know.
suspicion?
I guess my suspicion that it's likely non-human intelligence from some other galaxy or far out in our own galaxy that have come here but some time back, and that there are stations here. Of our remote viewers that was really good came up one day and said, I was looking around and I think I found a UFO base on Earth. This is during the remote viewing era, and my God, I've got to report this to my CIA contract monitor. And do I want to tell them that? And so I did, and one of the places he came up with some, but one of the places he came up with was Zeal in Australia. And so my CIA contract monitor says, well, I know it's station keeper, CIA station keeper out in Australia. I think I'll call him, and I won't tell him why I'm asking, but I'll ask him about Mount Zeal area. So he gave him a call, and he said, I'd like to ask you about that Mount Zeal area. He says, oh, you mean where the UFOs are always flying around?
Whoa.
So I thought, oh, gee,
Up next is billionaire aerospace entrepreneur Robert Bigelow, the man behind Bigelow Aerospace and a major player in government-backed consciousness and UFO studies. If you've ever wondered why somebody with billions of dollars would invest so heavily in psychic research or crash retrieval, it's because Bigelow believes the stuff is happening. Also, he's the person that quietly owned Skinwalker Ranch for over a decade before he gave it up to the current people that are shooting that TV show.
You had encounters with Bob Lazar. You were around when Bob Lazar first.
Now, is this going to be all about the Mylar balloon event?
What's the Mylar balloon event?
Oh, you don't know that one?
No.
So we all jump in my car to go out to the Alien Inn area out there. On
the Alien Inn, is that
up there?
Yeah, it's like a bar or something.
Yes, north of that area. And so Bob Lazar, George Knapp, myself, and I think Gene Huff, who was Bob's friend, we all go out there. Well, unbeknownst to me, Bob has a Mylar balloon, which really bounces the radar signature a lot for its size, and a bottle of gas, helium. So we find our way back out in the desert out there. I'm thinking we're on a UFO watch, which is always fun. Sometimes the best thing is the food you take along, right? And you're out there under the stars, and it's nice, and you have a good time just watching. So, but there's a rustle of things going on here, and next thing I know, there's a balloon, this Mylar balloon's inflated, and there's a slight breeze, and Bob lets it go. And we're on the opposite side of the mountain range from supposedly S4, and he wants to go that way. Thank God the wind was going in the opposite direction. It was traveling north instead of south, and it went the wrong way. So I'm thinking my life's just passed before my eyes.
Why do you think your life passed before your eyes? Because if the balloon goes towards Area S4,
it's going to get picked up.
They're going to go find out where it came from.
And Wackenhut security is going to come get us, and I'm going to spend the night in jail.
Right.
So it all just unraveled real quick.
And was this before Bob had gotten in trouble for bringing people to the observation point to watch? Because let's tell a story about Bob real quick. Bob said he worked for Area S4, and he was hired to back engineer what they believe were alien crafts. Along the lines, he had this top secret clearance, and along the lines of all this happening, they're monitoring his phone calls. Turns out Bob's wife is having an affair. Bob doesn't know about this. They remove him from the project because they believe he'll be emotionally unstable if he's freaking out, not knowing that his wife is having an affair, not knowing why he's pulled from this project, doesn't totally understand. So starts telling people about what he's doing and telling people, listen, I can take you to a place where once a week they do these tests. So he starts bringing people to this area. They see these objects flying in these spectacular ways that we really can't do with any of our conventional aircrafts. And then Bob gets in trouble for that. And then Bob goes on the George Knapp show and starts explaining all these different things, presumably for self-preservation, because the best way to probably protect your own life is to go public with this and explain everything that's happening. And they can discredit you and make you look like a nut, but if they kill you, and then it leads credence to your story.
Gives you a very huge hardship.
So when do you fall into this story?
Well, you've just given me an overload of information now that I'm pretty much aware of, but I don't know exactly when. I don't think, as I recall it, everybody was pretty much at ease, and it wasn't part of...
What year is this that this is all going on?
Oh, God, I don't know, 91?
So this is around that time. It's around, 91, when was he on George Knapp's show?
Yeah, somewhere in that time frame. But I wasn't aware of a lot until I don't think at that time I was aware of him taking people out on Wednesday nights to go see something out there. I missed out on that or whatever, and I don't think this was anything connected to that.
I think that was before this.
Probably.
That was, I think you're dealing with him out after he had met George, and after he had told his story, because George is with you.
Oh,
so obviously they had already met.
Oh, sure.
So what was your initial, obviously you're a person that has a deep fascination with UFOs. Now here you are talking to this guy who's clearly a genius, brilliant guy, Bob Lazar, and he's telling you this fucking bananas story. He's out there back engineering spacecrafts that came from another land that are using this element 115, this stuff that's just a theoretical element that wasn't even proven by Particle Collider until 2013, somewhere along that line. It was just theoretical up to that point. So he's telling you about all this stuff. What did you think?
I wanted to reserve judgment until I knew a lot more. And the more he talked, the more interesting it became. The more research that George did, things that he uncovered, it became more interesting. And so, as I said a while back, I think George was doing an interview with me, and I said, I wouldn't bet against the truth of the majority of everything that Bob has said. I wouldn't bet against it. Could they be errors and omissions for different reasons? Yeah, sure they could. But I would tend to say Bob is legitimate. And there's certain aspects of things that are parts of stories that you wonder, well, how could this happen and so forth. But I think if you take all of the collective information and the work that George Knapp has done to validate things, it's awfully damn impressive.
But George is such an important part of it because he's a legitimate investigative journalist, and that was his career. And so he poured himself into this.
Oh, yeah.
And exposed all the different aspects of this story that seem to indicate that he's telling the truth.
Oh, yes.
That's what's crazy about it.
And George is not any normal journalist. He's what? He has 6 Peabodys?
Yes, he's fantastic.
And
so he's diving into this, and the more he uncovers, the more it seems like Bob Lazar's story is legitimate.
Right. So I think I like the philosophy of reserving judgment until you have a preponderance of evidence that really moves you one way or another. You don't have to have 100%. I go by reasonable doubt.
But what was it like for you to be this guy who's had this deep fascination with flying saucers, and here you are talking? Like, let me tell you my experience with Bob. Doing the podcast with Bob, I wanted one of two things. I wanted to go, oh, this guy's full of shit. Or I wanted, whoa, it seems like he's not full of shit. I think he's telling the truth. I think this guy really did encounter these aircrafts and really did work on these spaceships, whatever they are. That's where I'm at right now. My experience with him, my communication with him, he didn't seem like he was full of shit at all. He's clearly a brilliant guy. His story has not changed at all over the 30 plus years that he's been saying it. It's a crazy story. But when you are a person like yourself, you so me even more than I, who is obsessed with this subject, the possibility of alien life that's visited this earth, and maybe even left crafts behind, and maybe these crafts are in the possession of some secret government agencies that are trying to observe them and back engineer them. What is it like to talk to this guy? Because this guy has seen the thing you're looking for. This guy, you're searching and all of your wondering and staring out into the heavens, and here's a guy that has actually touched it, actually worked on it, been inside one, tried to figure out how they work, can't do it, doesn't understand it. Is talking to these people. Everything's compartmentalized. You got the metallurgist people that are working on what kind of alloy this thing is made of. You got him, who's a part of the people that are trying to understand the propulsion system, and then you've got people that are giving you this information that maybe they have been here forever. Maybe this is a part of an archaeological dig. Maybe they've been trying to study these things for decades with no advancement at all.
So we came across, or myself and a couple other people came across to folks who could collaborate some of the things going on out there, such as silent craft actually lifting off at nighttime. Not looking as though the control was very good, but actually lifting off, maneuvering like a real small trial kind of thing. And that fellow observed it from a distance where he wasn't supposed to be. George has come up with collaboration, I think, from 2 or 3 other sources also, besides what Bob said, about certain aspects of things out there. It's just that Bob's story is so much more in-depth, so much more detailed, like that book that he talked about years ago coming across. Amazing things.
So tell people about the book?
Well, there was a book, as I remember, there was some kind of a book that Bob was allowed to look through, or he seized the opportunity to do it when he was in a room where the book was, but I think that was by design. And it was some kind of a holographic book that as you opened up the pages, whatever the stories were became a hologram. That's my recollection of a conversation that's decades old now. So if I got it wrong, fire me.
I understand.
You'll have to talk to Bob about that, would you?
Okay.
Or talk to George. And because I remember something like that, I was like, oh, wow, what an amazing way to portray information in some kind of a book and actually have holographic images coming forth out of the, I don't know. It just was, so that I have never heard of that being repeated any place in terms of something else like that happening. And so much that happened to Bob, it was so unique.
There was also some very strange summary of what they understand or what they believe to be true about the origins of human beings, and that they believed that what these visitations were about was that human beings are the product of accelerated evolution, and that these species from wherever had been coming here and doing genetic experiments with primates and created human beings, which is the ultimate, like, who knows? Wow, that's fun to think about. But we were talking about this last night, how bizarre humans are. That out of all these things on Earth, we're the only ones with shoes. Out of all these things, we're the only ones that have to wear clothes. We're the only ones that jump into metal boxes with rubber tires and roll around on these hard surfaces that we created, or fly in planes, or send video through your phone to other people that are on the other side of the continent. We're weird. We're real weird. We're way weirder than anything else that exists. And if we are really a product of some sort of accelerated process, like that, this is how they get the party started on these planets. They find semi-intelligent, curious animals that are using tools or using opposable thumbs, and they do some things to them.
There's a large variety of potential beginnings, more evidence for some than others, right? So that's always the trick.
Have you considered that? Is this a subject that you've deeply considered and thought about?
Not really.
Really?
I'm here. I don't want to look a gift horse in the face. I'll take it for what it is.
Really? I think about it a lot.
I don't know. I think I need more evidence to be more curious about. I'm more concerned about other kinds of things that are now than where did the human species come from particularly. I'm more driven by other kinds of things that could make a difference today going forward.
So getting back to the Bob Lazar thing, when you first got to know him and you first were considering this story and how crazy it was, what was it like to meet a guy who, at least by his own accounts, had encountered this thing that you were seeking?
Well, Bob's a likable guy. He, as you said, he's very smart. And so he's interesting to talk to, right? And so that's more than just entertaining. To listen to his story is profound, right? So it gives you an awful lot to think about and to try to position as to how can you measure future information you might get against that story. How can you verify different kinds of things? And so I've heard a lot more silly things, I think, than what Bob was talking about. Didn't seem all that ridiculous. And then the more you get to talk to him, the more you get to know him, and people like George, who's an investigative journalist, it gets more and more.
Finally, we have pilot and UFO experiencer Ryan Graves on the Joe Rogan Experience 1883. If you've stayed this long in the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Let's finish this out with Ryan Graves.
Please tell people your credentials, what your background is.
Sure. So my name is Ryan Graves. I have an engineering degree, mechanical and aerospace engineering. I promptly left doing that to go fly F-18s for the Navy as soon as I graduated college. Did that for about a decade, both operationally in combat as well as in an instructor role, teaching the new students. And we did witness something while we were flying in our jets, but we were doing it we witnessed it in the context of our just everyday flying in our missions.
And what year was it that you witnessed this?
So we started seeing these in 2014 was the earliest that I know. 2013, late 2013, early 2014. And
could you describe what was the very first experience?
Yeah. So for me personally, the experience was simply just flying out to the area like I would any other day. And instead of seeing an empty airspace with just my wing person or another squadron doing something in a different block, there were also a lot of different radar contacts, which is immediately a problem because we could be hitting one of those or someone working in our area. And this was happening because we upgraded our radar the best we could tell. We were in a earlier radar and we had come back from deployment. We entered a maintenance phase, it's called. We kind of do a little bit less flying, upgrade the jets if we need to, do any long-lasting maintenance. And we upgraded to the APG-79, which was a much better radar.
And what is the difference in the capabilities of the upgraded radar system versus the original system?
Mm-hmm. So kind of practically speaking, it's like going from an analog TV essentially to OLED. It's a digital modern tool compared to more of an analog classical radar that has more limited range and has less ability to track multiple targets and things of that nature. So just generally speaking, we would expect to see more objects if there were any out there, or smaller objects, but there shouldn't have been any objects out there.
And so how far offshore are you when this is all going down?
Our working areas start about 10 miles off the coast, and then it goes out 100 or 250 miles or so, though we don't usually use those far eastern areas. But we would only see them over the water. So they would really only be in our working areas, maybe slightly in between the working area and land, but never over the land. Sometimes over the bays that are in the area that are quite large, but never just zooming west over land or anything like that.
And is this restricted airspace?
It's not. So that's a tricky question. For us operating in a military operating area, it is not restricted in the sense that you have to be, there's only one person allowed in there. You could have these little Cessnas kind of bumbling in there, but they would get called out pretty quick, both from the air traffic control agency that's working out there, as well as the F-18s and the other aircraft that may be working out there. But in a broader sense, when we look at it in relation to our air defense identification zone, which is essentially a band of airspace that surrounds our entire country, if your flight path originates over the water outside of that ADIZ and you proceed into that ADIZ, into our controlled airspace, then you do have to essentially have permission to enter that airspace. It's not a restricted airspace like a traditional bombing range, but it is protected airspace. It's our coastal air.
So you have this upgraded radar system, and what are you detecting?
So on the radar, really what we can learn from that is essentially the kinematics of the object. So where is it essentially, and what direction is it going, how fast is it going, things of that nature. We can't necessarily make up the shape or things of that nature. So it's a representation. It's like a block on our screen to show that information. And so when we see that on our radar, we can tell where it's located, perhaps what's located around it if there's other objects we're detecting, how fast it's going, what direction it's pointed in, what direction it's traveling in. So we call that velocity vector. So if we see this essentially little circle, it'll have a tail coming off of it. And that tail represents the nose of the vehicle, at least as its flight path is going. And so with that, we would typically see an aircraft just kind of trudging along with a straight line, taking occasional turns. But these objects had a little bit more of a, I don't want to say random, but less controlled flight path. That velocity vector would gump around a bit more. They would not proceed in a perfectly straight line as you would imagine a flight navigation computer would take you, right? It takes you from A to B in the straightest line possible. These objects seem to be moving in a direction that was not a straight line, but generally proceeding in that direction. And so they would be meandering slightly, but moving in that general direction, both three-dimensionally and horizontally. So
winding around, going up, going down.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not on a flat plane, and they're not going in a straight line.
So I don't want to draw too many firm statements like that, because we would see them being flat too. We'd see them perfectly stationary up there, regardless of the wind.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. So what kind of wind are you talking about?
Oh gosh, at altitude you can have anywhere up to 100, 120 knots of airspeed.
What is that in miles per hour?
It's about 100, 130, 140 miles an hour.
So they're completely stationary with 140 mile an hour wind?
Correct.
How would something do that?
It's confusing to me as well. Even if we had something that could just burn that much energy, right? You had a sphere surrounded by little rockets, right? Just imagining something right now. And if you wanted to keep that perfectly stationary, right, against gravity, you could just fire all the rockets at the bottom really fast and hopefully keep it flat, right?
Right.
It's going to have tiny little variations. And then if you have wind hitting it and all this, you could potentially have those rockets try to counter it, but it would never be perfectly still in winds like that.
Because the wind's not perfectly still either, right?
Exactly.
It changes and varies.
It does. So it's almost like it's the wind. It's not even really fighting the wind, it seems. It just seems like it's just there in a way.
Wow. So the first time you see these things, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the first time really was, well, what is this, right? It's not a UFO or something mysterious at this point. It's at what we're thinking at this point we see on the radar is just, well, our radar is broken, right? These perhaps don't represent physical objects yet because we hadn't visually seen these or seen them on our camera yet. And so we kind of like, hey, what's going on here? Is anyone else seeing this kind of thing? But not really investigating it, right? It's just kind of like, all right, there's stuff out there, but maybe next time we'll take a look. But the way our systems work, when we have all these contacts on our radar, and if we kind of just select one out with our little cursor there, all our sensors go to it. Our FLIR goes to it, which is our camera system. All our weapons, they have their own little eyes in some sense, and they all look in that direction. And so eventually someone had one of these selected and flew close enough so that as they look at their FLIR system, their camera, they could see something that was at the spot represented on the radar, right? So there was something there.
So they were seeing it visually with their own eyes?
Not at this point, just on the FLIR system.
The FLIR system.
And so it's a regular camera and also an infrared camera. And so typically we'll roll around in infrared just because it returns a better image typically. So it didn't look like an object they were seeing on the FLIR, it just looked like a source of IR energy in a sense, almost as if someone was shining a flashlight. But something had to be there to be reflecting that energy or creating it. So at this point, to answer your question, now we're like, oh, this isn't just an error on our radar. This is perhaps, we're thinking this is real. We have to really respect this as a safety hazard now. Even if it's just a small, however small ribbon of tinfoil, right? Let suck down the engine and still take out an aircraft, right? So we have to be very respectful of that.
A Mylar balloon type thing?
Potentially, right?
But how fast are these things going?
So sometimes stationary, right? Sometimes they would be going around 0.6 to 0.8 Mach, which is at altitude about 240 to maybe 330 knots, around there.
So somewhere in the range of an airplane.
A fighter aircraft would be flying around at those airspeeds, except sometimes they would be perfectly stationary as well.
Right. So it's not exhibiting any sort of patterns that you've recognized in the past?
No, they have actually. So, although
with the stationary, no, right?
Correct. With the stationary, no. With the meandering flight path, no. But I would also see them essentially fly what we call a racetrack pattern. And essentially what that means is they fly in a straight path, and then they do a 180-degree turn in a certain direction, then they fly a straight path, then turn again. So that's what we call a racetrack pattern as opposed to a circular holding pattern. We did witness racetrack patterns. In fact, I think there's been some cases off the West Coast just the past couple of weeks where people have also been observing objects flying in racetrack patterns high at altitude with lights. So I do recognize that behavior, but I don't necessarily think that means we have to attribute it to normal behavior necessarily. That type of flight path is important because it's a very efficient way to fly, right? If you have to maintain the position in a certain area, you want to minimize how much you're turning. Because anytime you're turning in an aircraft, you're using more energy than if you were just flying straight and level. And so by having a racetrack pattern, it's an efficient way of holding in a position by maximizing straight and level time and minimizing your turn time.
And how long would these things stay up there for?
So from our experience, and again, we weren't studying these, but they were always out there. They were out there when we took off, we'd see them, and then we go to land, they would still be out there.
Every day?
Every day.
Every day?
Every day.
So you guys go from not having any idea that these things are out there to an upgraded radar system to seeing them every day. What is the thought? Like, how are you feeling when these? Is there an evolution of the thought pattern of how you're addressing these things and thinking about them? Initially, you're thinking they're errors. When do you start getting a thought that, like, what the fuck is this thing?
So that happened when we visually saw one. And the first time we visually saw one, object was directly at what we call the entry point of the area. So that box that I told you about in the sky that starts 10 miles off the coast, there's a particular GPS location and altitude where incoming traffic will fly in and outbound traffic will fly in the exact same spot, but will fly out 1,000 feet lower. There were 2 aircraft from my squadron, VFA 11, and they took off as a flight of 2. That means they're essentially flying in a formation like this. And as they hit the area, one of these objects went right between the aircraft. The lead air crew saw the object. The Dash 2 aircraft crew did not, which is not surprising because they're usually very focused on flying formation. You're just staring right at that aircraft. The lead really has actual leeway to look around. So he saw it and he immediately came back. I have to assume he didn't have it on his radar because he wouldn't have flown through this object at the entrance point. He turned around, flew back, landed, and I was in the ready room when he come back, and he had all his gear on, which typically is not a good thing because you want to get that stuff off as fast as possible. So usually means there's a problem of some nature. And he was just sitting there saying, hey, I almost hit one of those damn things. And we all knew what he was referring to, even though we didn't necessarily have a name for it, just because we were seeing these so much. And he described it. He described it just as a black or dark gray cube. And that cube was inside of a clear translucent sphere. Essentially, the apex or the corners of that cube, best he could tell, were touching the inside of that sphere.
And that description mirrors many of the descriptions that people have had of these, whatever you want to call them. Whether they're calling them UAPs now for some strange reason. UFOs is I don't know, does it have a dirty connotation to it? Is it tainted because of so many crazy people talk about UFOs? Is that what it is?
It does come with a lot of assumptions baked in.
Yeah, it baked in. That's something, but whatever it is, that is a design that people have reported seeing before. That this translucent sphere and this cube, can you see through the cube?
Not to my understanding, no.
So it's some sort of solid black cube that's inside this translucent sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just floating around and flying around the sky.
So that's a good point. Is it floating around? Is it flying around? It's doing both, which is strange, right? Because you could think of that description and go, okay, that's kind of some kind of weird balloon maybe with stuff in it. And that's certainly one way. If you just view that angle of it, then it seems explainable. But when that balloon object starts cruising down at 0.8 Mach, that nullifies that particular idea. And you'll see that a lot, where it's not just like that one picture or that one behavior. It's really zoom out a bit and look at everything in relation to each other and say, okay, why is this weird? It was hanging out in a racetrack pattern. That's not exotic. But when you learn it was doing it for perhaps 13 hours.
13 hours?
Perhaps they were out there all the time. So I land and I go back. And we weren't on a intel mission to analyze these, right? We're going to do our training. It's very expensive, $30K an hour to fly these things, right? So really the only time we can put energy into looking at these things is when we're transiting back and forth or waiting for a fight to start. And so it's never like dedicated analysis.